tip of the Lincolnshire Wands, and a discovery which could fill in some gaps about what we know about Britain after the Romans left, a period sometimes known as the Dark Ages. Around 1500 years ago, so history tells us, Britain was invaded by wave upon wave of Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and they transformed our country, giving us the English language and the basis of our laws. But actually, there is very little in the way of written records from the time. So if we want to understand Anglo-Saxon society and its cultural connections, we have to turn to archaeology. And this next excavation gives us a chance to find out more. Last year, local landowner and metal detectorist Jim Hoff was exploring fields next to his home where he came across some rare and intriguing objects. A small team of archaeologists from the University of Sheffield started to investigate, and it wasn't long before they uncovered some graves dating to the late 5th, early 6th centuries, packed with jewellery and other precious goods. The discovery was so rich and so intriguing that this year they're returning for a full excavation led by Hugh Wilmot.
Here we are at SCREMBY, and let's go and look at the site. So one of the questions we got here is, the people who are buried here, were they born here in Lincolnshire? Are they sort of second-generation migrants? Or perhaps their ancestors have always lived here and they've just adopted new styles and fashions of the incoming Anglo-Saxons? And these are all questions we can hopefully answer from the grave goods they've been buried with, but also some of the science we can do back in the land.
Analysing the skeletons and the objects buried with them should provide insights into whether these people were British natives or immigrants. The team has stripped a large area and have already identified a number of graves in the ground.
Possibly there's the fill of another grave coming through here.
After last year's dig, they're expecting some great finds from the site, and they're not disappointed.
It's the second day, and we've just started excavating some of the graves. And here we've got one leg running down here, a large femur there, and lying right next to it here is a huge spearhead. And it dates to about 525 to about 550 AD, and it's the largest kind of spear you're going to see in the Anglo-Saxon world.
As the team targets some of the other graves, they are rewarded with even more exotic finds.
We have this pretty well preserved skeleton of an adult female. Down at her hip, she's got the remains of an ivory bag ring, and this went round the mouth of a sort of fabric bag that would have hung from her hip. And inside it are all sorts of artefacts.
Ivory was a rare commodity in Anglo-Saxon Britain, but this isn't the first ring to be uncovered here.
We found one elephant ivory bag ring last year, and already, just over a week into the dig, we found two more. So what stage are we at with this one, Megan?
Well, we're going to lift the copper brooch and this other tube piece,
Right.
and the girdle hanger.
Oh, well, I think that's the nicest one we've got so far.
After 1,500 years in the ground, the ring is extremely delicate.
Beautiful. Good job, team.
And now lifted, it'll be sent to the lab for analysis.
So one of the things we can do, which is quite simple, is radiocarbon date the elephant ivory to see how old it is. Now, if it's sort of 6th century in date, probably tells us it's coming from Africa. But if it ends up being sort of 10,000 BC, they must be reusing mammoth ivory, so that's quite an easy one to test out.
And pieces of exquisite jewellery are turning up in further female graves.
Now James has got a bead here, a very, very fine little amber bead.
Sources of amber are rare in Britain, but they're finding a surprising amount of this material here.
We've nearly finished excavating this burial here, and it has a young lady in it, and on her forearm is the skeleton of a baby. Placed upon both the mother and the baby were a large quantity of beads. So far we've got nearly 500 of them. It's really quite extraordinary.
Many of these female skeletons are buried with elaborate bead necklaces.
That's quite some bling.
It's been a successful excavation. population and with so many intriguing discoveries, what can the archaeologists tell us about these people and their bloom? I've asked Hugh Wilmot into the lab to give me some answers. Hugh, this is an astonishing site. It is completely new. Nobody knew it was there.
No, absolutely. There hasn't been a cemetery in this location recorded before. At first we thought it was just going to be a standard sort of Saxon cemetery, but actually it's turned out to be rather more interesting.
And just extraordinary finds.
Amazing.
You've brought some of them in here together with one of the skeletons. Are these finds that were actually found associated with this skeleton?
Yes, these are some, not all the finds that were found with this skeleton, but here are some of the sort of the more diagnostic ones, some of the large ones.
They seem to be very richly furnished graves.
They're extremely richly furnished. Of the 24 graves we excavated, only one had no artefacts in, which is a very unusual proportion.
So she would have been placed in the grave fully clothed then with all her...
Oh yes, absolutely.
With all her accessories. What's that? It looks like a little buckle.
Well, these are where the finds start getting a bit more special.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual design that you don't normally find in Lincolnshire.
Where do you normally find it then?
Well, not many buckles like this have been found, but where they have been, they've been found in Kent or on the south coast of England.
Oh, really? So, yeah, quite some way away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that one of the amber beads?
It is. It's a small bead. They're quite simple, quite plain, but this is just one example of them, of which we had hundreds.
I mean, there seem to be extraordinary numbers in each grave, or at least some of the graves
Yes.
were just full of these beads.
Absolutely. It's clearly one of their sort of biggest fashion statements, these necklaces, and certainly the most visible thing.
And do we know where this amber has come from? Because obviously that's not local.
We do. 20 years ago, all these techniques for provenancing the amber, looking at these ivory, we couldn't do that, so you had to speculate. But now we can actually put some hard answers to some of these questions. And this comes from the Baltic, which is perhaps not unsurprising, because we know that the Baltic is a major supplier of amber.
And now, what about that ivory? Is that likely to have come along a similar reach then from Northern Europe into Northern Asia?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in the past people have speculated that perhaps, because you've got an amber trade coming from the Baltic, that perhaps ivory was coming in the form of mammoth ivory from Siberia, where it's sort of preserved in the permafrost, and perhaps the same trade routes are bringing that ivory. But we've done radiocarbon dating on this ivory, and it's clearly contemporary to the Anglo-Saxon cemetery, so it must be an elephant.
Yeah, because mammoths weren't there at this time.
They've been extinct for 10,000 years,
Yeah.
so this has come from either Africa or maybe even India.
And what about the individuals themselves? Because you can provenance the amber and the ivory. There's a chance of provenancing these individuals. So do you have any results from that yet?
We do, and that's what's so exciting. Previously, we've kind of speculated where these people may have come from, whether they're perhaps, locals who have adopted new fashions, or have they actually migrated from northern Germany, from Denmark. And we've done isotope analysis on this individual, and we came up with quite a surprising result. They're not from Lincolnshire, but they're not from further afield in terms of across the North Sea. This individual grew up on the south coast, Kent, perhaps around as far as Brighton, that kind of a region.
Really?
Yeah. So
isn't it extraordinary to have that level of biography of somebody?
absolutely.
That you know that as a young girl she was living down in the southeast, and then she moved northwards and ended up in Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
For me, this is where she came from. She's wearing things still which hark back to her childhood in Kent.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a memory that lingers.
Yeah. This new discovery at SCREMBY is revealing some wonderful detail of life in the Dark Ages, and it's allowing us to delve deeper into the cultural connections of our Anglo-Saxon ancestors across the British Isles and beyond. Our next dig diary takes us to the furthest reaches